It is a peculiar fact of English life that death, when it comes in evening dress, is considered doubly inconvenient. It disrupts not only the natural order of the soul, but also the kitchen timetable, the drawing-room conversation, and, most regrettably, the seating plan. So it was with some vexation, though not, one might add, with surprise, that Lord Peter Wimsey found himself summoned from his postprandial brandy at Foxheath Hall by a footman the colour of wet suet and twice as flabby. The inspectors. "Come, my lord," the man stammered, eyes fixed somewhere just below Wimsey's typin, "and he says it's a matter of urgency." "Quite. Death always is, unless it's one's own, in which case I dare say it can wait until one has finished the port," Wimsey murmured, flicking a negligent glance at the cigarillo he had only just lit. "Do inform the inspector that, the last time I was fetched from a country house dinner, it turned out to be a dog choking on a cravat. Still, one must keep up appearances, shall we?" He rose with the air of a man about to inspect the quality of a new waistcoat rather than a corpse. The dining room, oak-panelled, dimly lit by sconces, meant to flatter wrinkled dowagers, fell into hushed curiosity as he passed. Lady Marbury, matriarch and mistress of Foxheath Hall, gave a tiny nod from behind her lorgnette, as though authorizing a minor domestic repair. The body had been discovered in the blue parlour, a room seldom used except by visiting pianists or the particularly melancholic. It was an odd chamber, all wedgwood panels and ornamental busts, with an unfortunate tendency to echo footsteps like accusations. The corpse, male, middle-aged and elegantly attired in evening clothes now tragically creased, was sprawled rather ungraciously beneath the portrait of Sir Ethelred Marbury, 1702–1769, who appeared to be observing the scene with contemptuous amusement. "I suppose," Wimsey said, bending with the grace of a ballet master, "we are all to understand that the deceased threw himself on the carpet in an excess of enthusiasm for Sir Ethelred's portraiture." The inspector, Morton by name and disposition, merely grunted. He had the air of a man who had been denied dessert. No sign of forced entry. Nobody saw anything. The man was a guest. Mr. Alistair Hartley, solicitor, stayed in the East Wing. Came down for sherry, never came back up. Tragic, Wimsey said. He knelt beside the body, his keen eyes flitting across the scene. No visible wound, no blood. Ah, what's this? He plucked delicately from the thick Axminster carpet a small glittering object, a cufflink, gold, oval, the family crest. Of the Marburys impressed on its surface, but the bar was bent sharply, as if wrenched or stepped upon. "Cufflinks," Wimsey mused, holding it to the light. "Symbol of civilization, or the last vestige of it before a man reverts to his primal state and strangles a fellow guest. Tell me, Inspector, has Lady Marbury a habit of hiding blunt instruments in the pianoforte?" Morton snorted. "The cause of death's not obvious, might be poison. Doctor's on his way. Until then, I'm not speculating." "Splendid policy," Wimsey replied. "For though personally I find speculation quite improves the flavour of the evening." He rose, pocketing the cufflink with absent grace. The air in the blue parlour had grown noticeably colder, though whether from draughts or dread was difficult to say. The other guests, murmuring behind the velvet ropes of propriety, had begun their inevitable theories. An unfortunate fall, a stroke, perhaps suicide brought on by the weight of estate law. Wimsey, however, had caught the eye of a parlour-maid, standing discreetly near the door. She curtsied, but there was a tremor in her gloved hand. Her eyes darted not to the body, but to the heavy clock on the mantelpiece, its hands frozen at precisely 9:17. Later, in the privacy of the smoking-room, Wimsey would remark to his valet Bunter that it was never the murder itself that smells. Off but the timing and occasionally the wallpaper, but for the moment he simply stood over the corpse, one brow slightly arched. "A lawyer dies in a drawing-room," he said to no one in particular, "and the only clue is a broken cufflink, with no cuff to match. Curious, very curious indeed." And with that, Lord Peter Wimsey smiled faintly, as though someone had just misquoted Milton in the presence of tea, and turned his gaze to the long corridor beyond. The parlour-maid's glance had been fleeting, no more than the flutter of a swallow's, a wing in a summer gust, but Lord Peter Wimsey noticed it as surely as he might have a blood stain on a starched cuff. He tucked the broken cufflink into the inner pocket of his evening jacket with a practised motion, and stepped away from the corpse as though relinquishing his place in an increasingly interesting chess match. "Tell me, Inspector," he said, with apparent idleness, "how long would you say the unfortunate Mr. Hartley has been in his current recumbent posture?" Morton consulted his notebook, a leather-bound volume with corners as worn as his patience. Discovered at 9:25. That was about, 15 minutes ago. Parlourmaid found him. Miss Dorothy Chalmers. She'd been sent to retrieve an ashtray. Fellow must have been dead at least half an hour by then, if not more. Place was cold. "Indeed," said Wimsey, almost absent-mindedly, his gaze drifting back to the clock on the mantelpiece. "And the time frozen. In horological splendour above the fireplace?" 17 minutes past 9, Morton replied. "Clocks wound weakly. Always runs true, according to Lady Marbury." "How reliable of it," Wimsey murmured. "I wish more gentry had such consistent mechanisms. Did Miss Chalmers remark upon the clock?" "No," Morton said, flipping through pages. "She saw the body, screamed and ran. Typical servant reaction. I've already spoken with her." "But with respect, Inspector," Wimsey said, smiling faintly. "You have spoken to her. I should like, if it's all the same, to speak with her." Morton gave a grunt that might have meant assent or indigestion. Wimsey took it as permission, and made his way down the corridor where the parlour-maid had been spirited away. He found her sitting on a small bench near the butler's pantry, a cup of tea cooling untouched on a saucer beside her. She was in her early 20s, with flaxen hair, a turned-down mouth, and the sort of pale, modest prettiness that left no trace in a crowd. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, except for one finger, which trembled in a rhythm of its own. "Miss Chalmers," Wimsey said gently, "I understand you had the misfortune of discovering Mr. Hartley." She nodded without speaking, her eyes fixed on a knot in the floorboard. "I quite sympathize," he said, lowering himself onto a neighboring stool. "Dead solicitors are rather disagreeable company at the best of times, and in parlours they're positively uncouth. But I should be grateful for a word or two just to clear up a minor chronological quibble." She looked at him uncertainly, but something in his tone, neither police nor master, but vaguely companionable, seemed to encourage her. "I only went in for the ashtray, my lord," she said. "Miss Templeton, Lady Marbury's niece. She was in the morning room and asked for one. I'd just come through the hall when I saw the light was still on in the blue parlour. It's usually locked after 8. And was it?" "No, my lord. Door was ajar, just a crack. I pushed it, and, well, there he was, just lying there. You saw no one else?" "No, my lord, but—" She paused, fingers tightening around each other. "Yes?" "The clock, my lord, the one on the mantel. I thought I heard it chime just once as I opened the door. But when I looked at it, the hands were all wrong. It said 17 past, but the dining-room clock was already at 1/2 past. Said Wimsey, tilting his head. "So it struck, though it had stopped?" She nodded, visibly confused. "That's why I thought I must have imagined it. It made no sense." "It often doesn't," said Wimsey reassuringly. "But let's keep a firm grasp on nonsense. It often has a habit of leading us somewhere useful." He stood, offered a small bow, and returned to the blue parlour, where Morton was now consulting with a red-faced man in a bow tie and tailcoat, whose look of harassed authority suggested a doctor in a social bind. "The body," said the doctor briskly as Wimsey entered. "Well, no visible trauma, no blood, pupils fixed. Rigour just setting in. Death likely occurred between 9 and 9:15. Possibly cardiac arrest, though I'd prefer a post-mortem. Before committing myself. Could have been something he drank." "Speaking of drinks," said Wimsey, glancing around, "has anyone located Mr. Hartley's glass?" Morton frowned. "There wasn't one." "No glass? But he was meant to be enjoying a sherry, was he not?" "That's what Lady Marbury said. He excused himself after dinner, said he preferred a quiet sit before joining the others in the drawing-room. No bottle, no decanter, no glass," Wimsey repeated thoughtfully, "and yet the man was toasting something in solitude." Morton grunted again. Wimsey turned and stepped lightly over to the far side of the room. The blue parlour had 2 doors, one that opened into the hallway and another smaller and less formal that led into the library. He tried the handle. "Locked. Interesting," he murmured. "Inspector, who has the key to this door?" "Lady Marbury's valet, I believe," Morton said. "Keeps the library shut when guests are in residence. Too many wandering fingers." "Indeed," said Wimsey. "Now I wonder if we might have a look at the guest list." This produced a flurry of movement. Morton barked at a constable, who fetched a list from the house's steward. Wimsey scanned it quickly. "Lady Marbury and her niece, Miss Templeton," he said aloud. "Lord Peter Wimsey, though I rather hope to be left off that sort of thing. Our late Mr. Hartley, Mr. Sebastian Glynn of the Colonial Office. Captain, and Mrs. Pelham, and Miss Eugenia de Vries. He tapped the paper lightly. "I say, Inspector, did you know that Miss de Vries once studied spiritualism in Vienna?" "What does that have to do with anything?" Morton snapped. "Nothing at all," said Wimsey with maddening calm, "merely recalling a rather good anecdote about ectoplasm and a chicken bone, but I digress." He folded the list neatly and tucked it into his pocket. His eyes drifted once more to the mantel clock, with its delicate gilt scrollwork and still hands, and then to the smudged carpet beneath the settee, barely noticeable, but marked with something faintly resembling soot. "I should very much like," Wimsey said suddenly, "to speak with Lady Marbury." She was found in the drawing-room, surrounded by the wreckage of a once promising evening. The guests had been tactfully diverted by Bunter into games of charades and an impromptu poetry recital by Miss Templeton, who recited Swinburne with alarming conviction. Lady Marbury received Wimsey with the air of one accommodating a sudden and inexplicable thunderstorm in the middle of her croquet lawn. "My dear Lord Peter," she said, "this is all quite horrid. Mr. Hartley was a most respectable man, quiet, bookish, a bore perhaps, but not the sort to die at a party. You'd be surprised how often that sort do," Wimsey replied. "Might I ask, Lady Marbury, was Mr. Hartley acting oddly this evening?" She gave the matter a moment's consideration. "Well," she said, "he was jumpy, dropped his napkin 3 times at dinner, refused wine, and he kept touching his cuff as if something were wrong with his shirt." "His cuff?" said Wimsey, eyebrows lifting. "Yes, he fiddled with it. Left one undone, I think. Most uncharacteristic." "Indeed," said Wimsey. "I dare say it was." He bowed lightly, turned on his heel and made his way back to the scene of the crime. The body had been covered now, and the room felt colder still, though whether from the draught or from Hartley's enigmatic stillness was difficult to say. Wimsey stood before the fireplace once more, eyes flitting from the soot-smudged carpet to the stopped clock to the locked library door, a dead solicitor with no glass, a broken cuff-link with no matching cuff, a struck clock that had stopped before it struck, and a man who had been fiddling with his shirt like a schoolboy concealing. A cheat sheet. It was all beginning to form something, not a picture, not yet, but perhaps a sketch. A line here, a shadow there. And somewhere in the muddle Lord Peter Wimsey could feel it, a tiny fracture in the gold-leaf perfection of Foxheath Hall, a crack just wide enough for murder to slip through. The stillness in the blue parlour was thick, enough to bottle. Wimsey remained near the hearth, his eyes narrowed, the fingers of one hand absently tracing the edge of the fireplace surround. Somewhere behind him, Bunter entered soundlessly and coughed with polite significance. "My lord, Miss Templeton has retired for the night." She asked to be excused from further questioning. Wimsey turned slightly, expression unreadable. "Did she now? Too distressed, was she?" "I could not say, my lord," Bunter replied. "She appeared composed, though somewhat pale. She offered no complaint, but did mention a headache." "Well, headaches are often contagious in the vicinity of murder," Wimsey said. "Thank you, Bunter. Would you be so good as to see whether Mr. Glynn is presently occupied?" Bunter inclined his head and vanished. Wimsey lingered by the hearth, his eyes sweeping again over the scene, the overturned footstool, the reading, lamp angled oddly toward the ceiling, and the poker resting in the fender, blackened but unused. The soot on the carpet had not arrived there of its own volition. Someone had kneeled or perhaps stumbled, no, knelt was more likely, before the fireplace. But why? The silence was broken again, this time by the creak of the door opening. Bunter, dignified as a churchwarden, ushered in a man of lean build and sardonic aspect. Sebastian Glynn looked like a figure carved from disdain. He wore a smoking jacket in an unfortunately vivid tartan, and his moustache, waxed to hostile points, twitched at the sight of Wimsey. "I say, Wimsey," he drawled, "are we to be interrogated like suspects, or is this some charmingly archaic form of evening entertainment?" That depends, said Wimsey lightly. Have you anything to confess? Only to the theft of 2 brandy cherries and the murder of a Chopin nocturne, but I plead extenuating circumstances. Very decent of you, Wimsey replied. Let's walk, shall we? They strolled together down the corridor, their footsteps absorbed by the thick Persian runners that muffled every approach at Foxheath Hall. Wimsey's tone was airy, but his questions quickened like a pulse beneath the surface. You and Hartley, were you acquainted before this weekend? Glynn hesitated, then shrugged. Only by name. He drew up some legal nonsense for the Colonial Office last year. We had a drink in town once. Awfully dull man, always watching you with those sticky, glaucous eyes. Sticky, Wimsey repeated, raising a brow. You know the sort. Eyes like glue on blotting paper, as if he's writing down your soul in ink. And tonight, Glynn's lip curled, spoke hardly a word, muttered something about letters, I think, before dinner. Seemed twitchy. He wouldn't touch the brandy. Wimsey made a small noise of interest. Did he mention to whom these letters were addressed? No. He started to say something to Lady Marbury, then bit it back like a man who'd walked into a wasp. That niece of hers was hanging about, listening. The whole evening had a rather Gothic quality, don't you think? Everyone whispering and glancing at shadows. Delightful, said Wimsey. Did you see him after dinner? Briefly, said Glynn. He left before the coffee, said he had papers to go over. Didn't strike me as convivial company. And did you pass through the Blue Parlour at all? No, I had a cigar in the conservatory with Pelham. He'll tell you the same. Wimsey nodded and paused before the drawing-room door. Thank you, Glynn, that will do for now. Oh, and one last thing. Where do you keep your evening cufflinks? Glynn blinked. My cufflinks? What a question. In my dressing case, naturally. Excellent, Wimsey said, and disappeared into the room with a smile that barely touched his mouth. He found Morton bent over a low side table, making copious notes, while 2 constables tried in vain to occupy themselves discreetly near the decanter tray. Wimsey perched on the edge of a settee and regarded him. Did you notice, he said, that Mr. Hartley's shoes bore no trace of mud? Morton looked up, scowling. I don't make a habit of examining shoes, Wimsey. You should. Most shoes are appallingly indiscreet. Hartley must have walked directly from the dining room to the parlour without stepping outside or crossing the gravel. But then, how do we explain the soot on the carpet and no ash in the grate? Morton blinked. You think someone else brought it in? I think, said Wimsey, that someone knelt there, deliberately. And I think they had reason to believe the fireplace would offer concealment. Alas, no secret passages. Just an old-fashioned chimney, wide enough to admit a rook but not a murderer. A constable cleared his throat. Begging pardon, sir, but Mr. Pelham would like a word. Wimsey stood. By all means, let's indulge the gallant captain. He found Pelham in the billiards room, nervously bouncing a cue ball off the cushion with military precision. He was a broad-shouldered man of 40, moustached and tanned from long foreign postings, the sort of man who looked permanently at ease in khaki. Lord Wimsey, he said stiffly, I won't waste your time. I had a few words with Hartley. Earlier, before dinner. Yes? Pelham glanced around. He'd heard a rumour about my wife. Wimsey's tone did not change. And what did the rumour allege? That she had been entangled before our marriage. A certain overseas official. It was complete rot, but Hartley said he had letters. Suggested they might find their way to a private collection unless I wished to negotiate. Blackmail? Pelham flushed. He didn't use the word, but the implication was clear. I told him he was a damned snake and walked out. And Mrs. Pelham? She knows nothing. I didn't want to upset her. God knows what the fellow was thinking, digging through ancient gossip. It was as though he'd brought his own scandal. With him like luggage. I see, said Wimsey. Did you threaten him? I lost my temper. I said I'd expose him, report him to the Bar Association. Whatever those sharks have, that was all. Thank you, said Wimsey. You've been very candid. Tell me, did Hartley seem frightened when you confronted him? Pelham blinked. Frightened? No. Calm as ice, it was uncanny. Uncanny, Wimsey repeated softly. Yes, quite. He walked slowly back toward the parlour, the pieces settling like dust in an empty room. Blackmail, a missing glass, a broken cufflink, and a clock that had been stopped, deliberately, before it could toll the true hour. He encountered Bunter once more in the hallway. "My lord," Bunter said, "I took the liberty of examining Mr. Hartley's luggage. In the inner pocket of his suitcase, hidden beneath the lining, I found this." He handed Wimsey a slim bundle wrapped in oilskin. Wimsey unwrapped it with a slowness born not of suspense but of calculation. Inside were 3 letters, written in a looping feminine hand. The paper bore the faint scent of lavender and the watermark of a Viennese stationery maker. "Addressed to Hartley," Wimsey murmured, "and signed E. Would that be our Miss de Vries?" "It appears so, my lord. The dates span several months." Wimsey folded the letters and replaced them in the oilskin. "Very well, Bunter. Guard these for now. We've learned, at least, that Mr. Hartley was rather more socially invested than his legal career suggested." He moved toward. The stairwell gazed distant. "Bunter, how many guests in this house wear French cuffs?" "5, my lord. Yourself, Mr. Glynn, Captain Pelham, Mr. Hartley, and Mr. Templeton, though the latter departed before the weekend due to illness." "Then one of those 4, Wimsey murmured, "has either misplaced a cufflink or wants us to believe he has." And he mounted the stairs with the light step of a man who has seen the beginning of a ghost story, and suspects the ghost may be flesh and blood after all. Lord Peter Wimsey's ascent to the upper floors was accompanied only by the quiet, measured tick of the grandfather clock in the main hall, an almost mocking reminder that time, which so many believe governs all, can just as easily be bent or stalled to suit the needs of a clever hand. He paused at the landing outside Miss de Vries's chamber, briefly observing the lace curtains fluttering softly in the night breeze through a cracked window. The faintest trace of scent lingered in the corridor. Lavender, unmistakably the same, as the letters in Hartley's suitcase. A delicate, almost disarming fragrance that seemed to belie the undercurrent of menace woven through Foxheath Hall's walls. With a subtle tap, he rapped on the door. The silence that followed was long, enough to invite all manner of speculation before a tentative voice answered. "Yes, who is it?" "It is Lord Peter Wimsey. I wish to speak with you briefly, Miss de Vries." The door opened a crack, revealing a pale face framed by glossy black hair, eyes alert yet wary. "Of course, my lord. Come in." The room was modestly furnished, the walls lined with bookshelves whose contents appeared more ornamental than practical. Novels in French, old volumes of poetry, and a conspicuous absence of any legal texts. A desk bore an array of inkwells and fine papers, all immaculately arranged, as though anticipating a visitor of some importance. Wimsey entered and closed the door behind him. "Miss de Vries, I must confess that this evening's tragic event has unsettled us all. You, I gather, were quite close to Mr. Hartley." She nodded, sitting on the edge of her bed with a nervous grace. "Yes, though. Not as close as one might suppose. We corresponded for some months, but I met him in person only twice before this weekend." "And these letters?" Wimsey indicated the folded bundle beneath his coat. "They are my own," she admitted quietly. "I had hoped they would remain private. There were delicate matters discussed." "Delicate indeed." Wimsey's eyes twinkled with a mild irony. "You spoke of a secret past, Miss de Vries. Might I be permitted to know more?" She hesitated, then said, "It is true. I came to England from Vienna several years ago, fleeing complications. I hoped to rebuild a quiet life here, but Mr. Hartley seemed fascinated by my history. I believe he thought it might be valuable leverage. Blackmail, as we suspected." "Not from me," she said swiftly. "I had nothing to gain from him. It was he who sought to stir the past up, threatening to expose letters to those who might do me harm." Wimsey allowed himself a brief smile. "You see, the affair of the broken cufflink is rarely about fashion, but rather what it conceals. Tell me, Miss de Vries, did Mr. Hartley have any enemies here at Foxheath?" "None that I know personally, but he did seem to worry about Captain Pelham. There was tension in the air whenever they crossed paths." "Ah, yes, Pelham's jealousy over his wife's supposed past engagement. And yet, Miss de Vries, how certain are you that Hartley's threats were solely aimed at Pelham?" She looked confused. "I assumed the letters were for Pelham's eyes alone, but now I wonder if I was mistaken." Wimsey nodded thoughtfully. Doubt is the seasoning of all mysteries. Now, about the night itself, were you in the parlour when the tragedy occurred? No, she replied firmly. I was upstairs. In my room. I heard nothing unusual, only the clock striking 10 and then silence. Wimsey raised an eyebrow. The clock striking 10. Interesting. Might I ask if the clock in the hall still chimes as it should? I do not know. I have not passed through the hall since retiring. That will be important, he said. Very important. He stood preparing to take his leave when she added, Lord Wimsey, I'm frightened. This house is full of secrets, and I fear some are darker than even a murder. As am I, Wimsey admitted, with an air of shared confidence. Thank you, Miss de Vries. I shall be in touch. Exiting, Wimsey found Bunter waiting patiently. I believe we should inspect the clock at once, he said. Together they returned to the main hall. The grandfather clock was an imposing presence, its brass pendulum swinging in slow, steady arcs. Wimsey crouched to examine the dial. The hands, he murmured, are set at 10 minutes past 9, yet Miss de Vries swore the clock struck 10. Bunter frowned. It is quite possible the clock was stopped deliberately. Precisely. My thought. Wimsey's gaze lifted toward the heavy weights and chains within the clock case, exposed through the glass panel. A mechanism could be manipulated to halt the chime without stopping the pendulum. A neat trick for the discerning. Murderer, he turned to Bunter. Have you observed the hall's lighting at night? Indeed, my lord. The chandelier is fitted with gas lamps, and the attendant must light them manually. This can leave brief intervals of darkness, meaning one might come and go unseen. Excellent. Now, the missing cufflink. We know 5 gentlemen wore French. Cuffs. The victim's cufflink was broken and found at the scene. Have all the others been accounted for? Bunter produced a small leather case. I took the liberty of gathering them. All are intact, except one pair belonging to Captain Pelham. He wore a single cufflink this evening. Wimsey's smile was faint but victorious. Curious indeed. The good captain may find himself in need of an explanation. Just then, the front doorbell rang sharply through the house, a crisp summons that broke the tense quiet. Bunter went to answer, returning swiftly with a telegram. From London, my lord. Wimsey broke the seal and read. His brow furrowed. A development from Scotland Yard. They have received an anonymous tip regarding a second letter sent to Hartley under another name. The letter apparently threatens exposure of a scandal much older and far more dangerous than the ones we have discussed. He folded the telegram carefully. It appears our web of secrets grows still more tangled. We must examine Hartley's correspondence in detail, and soon, for in this house of polite facades the shadows lengthen, and someone walks among us cloaked in deceit. With a final glance around the dimly lit hall, Wimsey's mind raced, weaving threads of motive, opportunity, and subtle contradiction. The pieces might yet yield a pattern, but only if one was willing to peer beyond the polite veneer of Foxheath Hall, into the murky depths where truth lurked, disguised as shadow. The telegram weighed heavily in Wimsey's pocket as he and Bunter retreated to the study, a room that had so far escaped the intrusion of the evening's grim events. The fire burned low in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the rows of leather-bound volumes that lined the walls. Here, amid the gentle crackling of embers and the lingering scent of pipe tobacco, the detective's thoughts began to crystallize. Bunter laid the bundle of letters carefully upon the polished desk, and Wimsey spread them out with the precision of a chess player arranging his pieces. The envelopes, some yellowed and creased, bore a variety of postmarks from London to Vienna, and even a curious dispatch from Dover. It was a mosaic of correspondence, each a potential key to unlock the mystery. Observe, Bunter, Wimsey said, lifting one letter with the faintest touch. This is the letter we found in Hartley's satchel, the one from Miss de Vries. Note the delicate handwriting and the careful folding. Compare it, if you will, to this one, postmarked a fortnight earlier, addressed to Mr. Edward Hartley, but signed only with an initial. Bunter squinted in the dim light. Indeed, my lord, the hand is quite different, more angular, less refined. A notable observation, Wimsey acknowledged. It suggests at least 2 correspondents, or perhaps 1 correspondent, with reason to disguise their hand. Now this second letter, the one referenced in the telegram, was sent under the pseudonym M.A. It is the tone that intrigues me. Less a plea and more a veiled threat. He carefully unfolded the delicate paper, reading aloud in his clipped tones. To Edward Hartley, be warned. The past is a shadow that lengthens with every step you take. Should you attempt to cross the threshold unprepared, the consequences will be dire. Remember Vienna, and remember the broken promise. Wimsey's eyes glimmered with dark amusement. Cryptic, no, and yet it places a foreign element firmly at the center of this affair. Vienna, Miss de Vries's past, perhaps. Bunter nodded thoughtfully. The plot thickens, my lord. Indeed, it does. Now let us reconstruct the timeline with care. Wimsey pulled a small notebook from his pocket, the pages marked with neat, angular handwriting. We know the murder occurred shortly after. 10 o'clock. Miss de Vries attests to hearing the clock strike 10, yet the grandfather clock's hands betray a different hour. Someone manipulated time itself. Bunter raised an eyebrow. A practical deception, to mislead all who listen. Precisely. But time is a rigid mistress, Bunter. Even the cleverest can only twist it so far before reality snaps back. Our task is to identify where the discrepancy lies. They examined the household routine, the lighting of the gas lamps, the last time each servant was accounted for. The whereabouts of the gentleman after dinner. Wimsey's pen traced lines between events, mapping movement with surgical precision. The drawing room was in use until 10, Wimsey mused. Mr. Hartley was seen arguing with Captain Pelham at 9:30. Miss de Vries was in her room and the servants were engaged in their usual tasks. But there is a gap, a window, if you will, in which the murderer must have acted. Bunter interjected. And the broken cufflink? It belonged to Pelham, and he wore only one. Exactly. The missing cufflink is no mere trifle. It is a signature, left behind or perhaps a token dropped in haste. Wimsey's expression darkened. The question remains, what did Pelham gain by removing his cufflink? To mislead, to disguise, or to signal? He rose, moving to the window and gazing out into the moonlit grounds. The gardens were silent, save for the distant rustle of leaves. I must speak again with Pelham. There are questions that only he can answer. The morning found Wimsey in the study of Foxhaith Hall, awaiting the arrival of Captain Pelham. The man entered with a stiff nod, his military bearing unchanged despite the weight of suspicion, now hanging about him like a shadow. Wimsey's greeting was cordial but edged with inquiry. Captain, I trust you slept well, though the events of last night must weigh heavily. Pelham's jaw tightened. I am well, thank you, my lord, though I confess I find myself somewhat bewildered by these accusations. Wimsey folded his hands and smiled thinly. Accusations, Captain, are yet to be made. We are merely gathering facts. For instance, the matter of your missing cufflink. Pelham's eyes flickered briefly. I lost it sometime during the evening. I was not aware until this morning. Curious circumstance, given the precision with which you attire yourself. Wimsey leaned forward. Might you recall when and where the cufflink was last seen? Pelham hesitated. During the argument with Hartley, I removed my gloves, and perhaps then, the altercation was heated and I was distracted. Wimsey nodded thoughtfully. An argument, yes. What was the nature of this disagreement? Pelham's voice was low, tinged with bitterness. Mr. Hartley believed himself entitled to certain information regarding my wife's past. He threatened to reveal matters best left forgotten. And you, Captain, how did you respond to these threats? Pelham's gaze hardened. I warned him to cease his meddling. I admit I was angry, but murder, that is beyond reason. Wimsey allowed the silence to hang before continuing. You were seen in the vicinity of the parlor shortly after 10. I was. I sought to confront Hartley once more, but found the room empty. I heard nothing unusual. Wimsey's eyes narrowed. Yet the clock struck 10, though the timepiece itself was set differently. And the broken cufflink lies near the scene. Pelham's composure cracked for the barest instant. I swear, my lord, I had no hand in this. As Pelham departed, Wimsey was left to ponder the man's vehement protestations. Was this genuine innocence, or the practiced mask of a man who believed himself above suspicion? Turning back to the letters, Wimsey considered the next steps. The anonymous M.A. letter suggested another player entirely, one who preferred the shadows and wielded secrets like weapons. He recalled Miss de Vries's mention of complications in Vienna. What if Hartley's past was not merely a story of blackmail but of far darker deeds? And if so, who would benefit from his silence? The pieces were assembling, slowly, inexorably, into a tableau of jealousy, fear, and deception. Yet a vital element remained obscured, hidden beneath layers of polite facades and carefully constructed alibis. Wimsey lit a cigar, the smoke curling in lazy spirals toward the ceiling. The game is afoot, Bunter, but this is no simple crime of passion. It is a mosaic of carefully placed lies, each waiting to be exposed by a steady hand and a clear mind. The investigation was far from over. In the quiet gloom of Foxheath Hall, the shadows deepened, and with them the promise of revelation. The morning mist clung to the hedgerows as Lord Peter Wimsey made his way through the gardens, the crisp air sharpening his thoughts. He had resolved to pay another visit to Miss de Vries, whose delicate composure had so far concealed more than it revealed. The young woman awaited him in the sunlit conservatory, her pale fingers nervously entwined. As she rose to greet him, "Lord Peter," she said, voice trembling but polite, "I trust you slept well?" "As well as can be expected under the circumstances, Miss de Vries. The house wears a rather sombre air this morning, does it not?" She nodded, eyes flickering toward the distant silhouette of Foxheath Hall. "Yes, it feels as though the walls themselves are watching, waiting." Wimsey's gaze was steady. "I wish to speak further of Vienna. You mentioned complications that might shed light on Mr. Hartley's predicament. Might you be persuaded to elaborate?" Her breath caught. "It is difficult, my lord. The past is a delicate thing, not easily unpacked. Precisely the reason it often holds the key to present troubles." Wimsey allowed a faint smile to play on his lips. "One must be delicately persistent." After a moment's hesitation, she began, "Edward, Mr. Hartley was not always the man you see before you. In Vienna, he was involved with certain circles, not the sort one boasts about at dinner." Wimsey inclined his head, inviting her to continue. "There was a scandal," she said softly, "an association with an artist, a man of dubious repute and questionable loyalties. Hartley had secrets, letters, documents, things that could ruin reputations, and the letter signed M.A. Could this be connected?" Wimsey probed. She nodded. "Yes, M.A. was a friend once, but things soured. Hartley was in possession of something M.A. wanted back. He threatened to expose the artist's past if forced. And this artist," Wimsey mused, "could be our elusive blackmailer, or worse." Miss de Vries looked away, a shadow crossing her features. "There is more. Hartley received a summons to return to Vienna. I believe he feared what awaited him." Wimsey's thoughts raced. The foreign element now seemed more than mere backdrop. The psychological tension, the threat of exposure, and the desperate desire for silence were all threads woven tightly into this tapestry of deceit. "I am grateful, Miss de Vries. Your candor is most helpful," Wimsey said. "One more thing, about the night of the murder. You mentioned hearing the clock strike 10. Was there anything unusual in the house at that hour? Sounds, footsteps, or voices?" She hesitated, then admitted, "I thought I heard the softest murmur of voices in the corridor but could not discern words." "Two voices?" Wimsey asked sharply. "Yes, one was certainly Mr. Hartley's, and the other?" She shook her head. "I cannot say." "Thank you. That is quite sufficient for now." Wimsey stepped back into the corridor, his mind weaving. The strands of new information with what he already knew. Two voices, an argument that had escalated beyond words, and a past that clawed at the present with relentless determination. He considered the servants next, particularly Mrs. Pritchard, the housekeeper, who had proved reticent but observant. An interview with her might reveal subtle contradictions or hidden loyalties. In the kitchen, Mrs. Pritchard was peeling potatoes, her face etched with lines of worry and fatigue. Wimsey's entrance caused her to start slightly. "Mrs. Pritchard," Wimsey began with his usual blend of charm and authority, "might I trouble you for a few moments? I seek to understand the finer details of the household on the night in question." She nodded briskly. "Of course, my lord. Did anything unusual strike you about the servant's behavior? Any comings and goings at odd hours? She pursed her lips. Well, sir, Mr. Dawes, the butler, was restless. He kept pacing near the study and glancing at the grandfather clock. Wimsey raised an eyebrow. The clock again, did he say why? Not a word, my lord, but he seemed unsettled more than usual, and I noticed the kitchen maid, Lily, disappeared for some time after supper, though she claimed to be fetching candles. Fetching candles at such an hour, Wimsey murmured, a faint smile playing at his lips. A curious excuse, especially since the gas lighting was in working order. Mrs. Pritchard shrugged. Aye, sir, but one doesn't question young folk too closely. Wimsey tapped his chin thoughtfully. Tell me, was there any dispute or friction among the staff that night? She hesitated. Nothing serious, though Mr. Dawes and the gardener, Mr. Ellis, had a tiff over some missing tools earlier in the day. Minor quarrels can sometimes mask deeper tensions, Wimsey said softly. Thank you, Mrs. Pritchard. Your help is invaluable. He turned away, eyes fixed on the clock in the hall as he pieced together the timeline once more. The servant's movements, the strange behavior of the butler, the absence of the kitchen maid, and the distorted time displayed by the grandfather. Clock all suggested a carefully orchestrated distraction. Returning to the drawing room, Wimsey found the clockmaker's report waiting. The clock's mechanism had been tampered with, the chimes deliberately set to ring early. A neat trick designed to deceive anyone listening for the hour. This explained Miss de Vries's hearing of the 10 o'clock strike, when, in fact, the clock had rung minutes ahead. A crafty manipulation to create a false timeline. Wimsey's mind raced. The murderer must have exploited this deception to establish an alibi or to confuse witnesses. He also recalled the earlier detail of the missing salver, an object from the silver sideboard that had vanished without explanation. Small, seemingly trivial objects often held great importance in such cases. A visit to the silver room was in order. There, amidst the gleaming trays and ornate cutlery, Wimsey noted a faint smudge on the velvet lining where the salver had rested. The imprint of a peculiar ring caught his eye, an insignia resembling a crescent moon entwined with ivy. Curious, Wimsey murmured. A token of membership, or perhaps a lover's emblem. He considered those present in the house who might wear such a ring. Bunter, he said as his valet appeared, have you noticed anyone displaying jewellery of this nature? Discreet but distinctive. Bunter thought for a moment. Miss de Vries wore a ring set with an amethyst, but nothing quite like that, my lord. Captain Pelham, perhaps? I cannot say, my lord. Wimsey nodded. The ring's owner might be a vital piece of the puzzle yet to be uncovered. As evening approached, Wimsey prepared to summon all concerned to the library, sensing that the hour for careful revelations was drawing near. Yet, before that gathering, one final inquiry was necessary, an unannounced visit to the gardener's cottage, where Mr. Ellis might offer insights freed from the constraints of the household's rigid etiquette. The path ahead promised more shadows and deceptions, but Wimsey was undeterred. Each thread pulled brought him closer to the truth concealed beneath Foxheath Hall's genteel surface, a truth that would demand unflinching clarity and perhaps an unkindly exposure of motives best left hidden. The game, as ever, was far from over. The gardener's cottage sat at the edge of the estate grounds, its weathered stone walls half swallowed by the creeping ivy that so often found refuge in forgotten corners. Lord Peter Wimsey paused briefly on the threshold, his gaze sharp beneath the brim of his hat, before knocking with a firm but courteous rap. After a moment, the door opened to reveal Mr. Ellis himself, a man of middling height, with a weather-beaten face and eyes that seemed to measure the world in cautious increments. He regarded Wimsey silently for a heartbeat before stepping aside. "Good afternoon, Mr. Ellis. I trust I am not intruding." "Not at all, my lord," Ellis replied, his voice low and steady. "Please, come in." The interior was sparse but neat, a modest refuge for a man whose labour was more physical than intellectual. Wimsey seated himself by the small hearth, the quiet ticking of a clock on the mantel accompanying their conversation like a metronome. "I have a few questions. If you would indulge me," Wimsey began, "particularly regarding the night of Mr. Hartley's death." Ellis nodded. "I've been expecting someone might ask." Your dispute with Mr. Dawes earlier that day over the missing tools, was it? Could you recount what transpired? Ellis's gaze darkened slightly. A few pruning shears vanished from the shed. Dawes accused me, but I had no cause to take them. It was a petty quarrel, but I admit tempers flared. Was anyone else aware of this altercation? Only the kitchen maid, Lily. She saw us arguing near the greenhouse. Wimsey's mind ticked over this. Lily's unexplained absence had already raised suspicion. The more tangled the web of movements and excuses, the closer one came to the culprit. Did you notice anything unusual about Mr. Hartley's behavior that evening? Ellis's expression softened. Yes, sir. He was restless, pacing the grounds as if something weighed on him. At one point I heard raised voices near the study. One was his, but the other I couldn't place. Wimsey leaned forward. Voices? Did you attempt to intervene? No, my lord, the study doors were closed and it seemed a private matter. And the clock? Wimsey's tone sharpened. Were you aware it had been tampered with? Ellis frowned. No, I can't say. I noticed. But Dawes has always been obsessive about that clock. Keeps it wound and polished himself. Obsession can breed peculiar behavior, Wimsey mused. Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Your candor is appreciated. As Wimsey rose to leave, a glint of metal caught his eye, a ring lying on a rough-hewn table. It bore the same crescent and ivy motif he had seen impressed on the velvet lining where the salver had rested. Whose ring is this? Wimsey asked, gesturing. Ellis's eyes narrowed. I found it in the greenhouse last week. Thought it might belong to Mr. Vries, but I never mentioned it. Wimsey pocketed the ring carefully. Another fragment of the puzzle, small but significant. Returning. To Foxheath Hall, Wimsey found the household gathering as planned in the library. The heavy curtains were drawn, muting the fading daylight and lending the room an almost sepulchral stillness. Mr. Vries, Captain Pelham, Mrs. Pritchard, Mr. Dawes, and the kitchen maid Lily were assembled, each with an expression ranging from wary to defiant. Wimsey surveyed them with mild amusement. Thank you all for assembling on such short notice. I hope the evening finds you well, given the circumstances. He paused, allowing the room's tension to thicken before continuing. Propose a little exercise in recollection and honesty. The events of the previous night have been obscured by uncertainty, yet each of you holds a piece of the truth. Eyes flicked nervously among the group. Wimsey's gaze rested longest on Captain Pelham, whose jaw was set with a hint of impatience. Let us begin with the clock. As you may know, it did not chime the hour in proper sequence. An early chime was intended to deceive anyone listening. Who among you can explain this? Mr. Dawes shifted uneasily. Mr. Dawes, Wimsey interrupted with gentle irony. A man devoted to his duties, yet perhaps too devoted to his toys. Dawes's face flushed. I maintain the clock as meticulously as any man could, Lord Peter. Any irregularity must be the work of an intruder, or someone with intimate knowledge of the house and its routines, Wimsey replied. Let us consider, then, the whereabouts of each of you during the hour of 10. He turned to Mr. Vries first. You heard the clock strike, yes? Indeed, she replied, though as I later learned it was some minutes early. And your location at that time? In my room, preparing for bed. Did you see anyone? No. Captain Pelham? Walking in the gardens, alone, the captain answered crisply. A necessary distraction given recent events. Mrs. Pritchard? Making final rounds to ensure the household's order. And Lily? The young maid's eyes darted nervously. Fetching candles, as I said. Wimsey allowed a delicate pause before continuing. And Mr. Dawes? The butler cleared his throat. I was near the study, attending to Mr. Hartley's papers. Aha, Wimsey said softly. And yet you mentioned an argument between yourself and Mr. Ellis earlier in the day. Could the clock and the quarrel be connected? Dawes bristled. I fail to see the connection. Time can be manipulated as readily as facts, Wimsey observed, pacing slowly. And in a house such as this, every moment carries weight. He held up the crescent ivy ring. This was found in the greenhouse and corresponds to an imprint left on the missing salver. It suggests a visitor or a resident who sought to conceal their presence. All eyes turned toward Mr. Vries, who paled slightly, but maintained her composure. "May I suggest," Wimsey said, "that the visitor and the one who disturbed the clock may be one and the same?" A shiver ran through the room, though the temperature remained unchanged. Wimsey moved to the window, gazing out at the gathering dusk. "The final question is this: who stood to gain from Mr. Hartley's silence?" A murmur rippled through the group, unspoken accusations hanging like storm clouds. "Each of you has reasons you would prefer to remain undiscovered," Wimsey continued, "yet the truth has a stubborn habit of surfacing." He fixed his gaze on Captain Pelham. "You are a man accustomed to command, yet you were seen in conversation with Mr. Hartley in the days preceding his death. Care to share the nature of your discourse?" Pelham's jaw tightened. "We discussed the estate's future, nothing more." "Estate affairs can be fraught with complexities," Wimsey said dryly, "and sometimes the simplest explanations mask the most tangled motives." He then addressed Lily directly. "You left the kitchen at a suspicious hour, yet the candles were unnecessary. What, pray tell, was your true errand?" The girl swallowed hard, eyes shining with tears. I was scared, sir. I thought I heard someone in the greenhouse." "Did you see them?" "No, only a shadow." Wimsey nodded thoughtfully. Fear, too, can be a powerful witness. He stood quietly for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle. The clock was set. To deceive, the salver removed to hide a clue. Voices heard where none should be, and secrets kept close. "The pieces are scattered, but not beyond gathering." Turning to Mrs. Pritchard, he said, "And you, madam, your role in the household is to oversee, yet silence is your currency. What say you of all this?" The housekeeper's eyes met his, steadily. "My loyalty is to Foxheath, Lord Peter. The truth, whatever it may be, will serve the estate best." Wimsey inclined his head. "A noble sentiment indeed. Let us hope it remains so when all is revealed." The evening shadows deepened as the assembly dispersed, each person retreating into the private labyrinth of their thoughts and fears. Wimsey remained in the library, turning over in his mind the subtle clues, the small contradictions, and the psychological threads that intertwined like ivy around the old house. He understood that the surface civility of Foxheath Hall concealed more than old wood and worn tapestries. It hid a desperate struggle for control, for reputation, and perhaps for survival. The night ahead promised revelations, but for now Lord Peter Wimsey allowed himself a moment's repose. The game was set, the players known, and the final act awaited his masterful direction. And with a faint arch smile, he lit a cigar, inhaling deeply as the last light faded beyond the window pane. The dawn crept cautiously over the horizon, casting a pale glow through the tall mullioned windows of Foxheath Hall's library. Lord Peter Wimsey sat back in his chair, the embers of his cigar long since extinguished, his thoughts restless and intricate as the ivy clinging to the estate walls. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly aligning, but the final picture remained, frustratingly elusive. As the household stirred to life, a discreet knock announced the arrival of Sergeant Parker. The young detective entered with a quiet efficiency, the steady cadence of his steps breaking the heavy silence. "My lord," Parker said, "I have returned with some findings from the greenhouse and the study." Wimsey nodded. "Please do. Share. Every detail counts." The sergeant produced a small envelope and a folded piece of parchment. "We located the salver hidden behind a loose panel in the greenhouse wall, just as you suspected. The crescent and ivy emblem is genuine, belongs to the Hartley family. But more interesting is this note found tucked beneath it." Wimsey unfolded the parchment carefully, eyes scanning the delicate handwriting. The message was brief, cryptic. "The truth hides in plain sight, where shadows gather and silence speaks." "An ominous clue," Wimsey murmured. "It suggests the victim was aware of some secret or perhaps a threat. Did you find any footprints or signs of forced entry near the panel?" Parker shook his head. "No, my lord. The panel seemed to have been opened from the inside recently, but no one else could have accessed it, except someone familiar with the greenhouse." "Which narrows our list considerably," Wimsey said. "Thank you, Parker. Your diligence is appreciated." Once alone, Wimsey reviewed the testimony from the household once more. The clock tampering, the quarrel over tools, the shadow Lily claimed to see, and now this note, all threads in a growing tapestry of mystery. He resolved, to speak again with Lily. Her fear, he suspected, might hold more than mere terror. There was an urgency behind it, a hint that she was withholding something vital. Wimsey found her in the kitchen, the morning light filtering through the high windows as she busied herself with pots and pans. She looked up, startled but composed. "Miss Lily," Wimsey began gently, "I understand the events of last night were distressing. You mentioned a shadow in the greenhouse. Can you tell me more about it? Anything unusual?" Lily's hands paused mid-task. I don't know, sir. It was just a shape, but it moved too quickly to be a branch or animal. I thought I heard whispering voices too, but I couldn't be certain." "Voices," Wimsey encouraged softly. "Did you recognize them?" "No, sir, it was too faint, but I swear it wasn't one of us. Was anyone missing from their usual post that night?" Lily hesitated, glancing toward the pantry door. "The gardener, Mr. Ellis, wasn't about. He left early, they said, but I never saw him leave." Wimsey nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Lily. Your honesty will help us greatly." Leaving her to her work, Wimsey made his way toward the gardener's cottage once more. The morning air was crisp, the dew sparkling on the hedgerows like scattered jewels. He found Ellis in the small garden, hands deep in soil, tending to a bed of delicate begonias. "Mr. Ellis," Wimsey greeted him, "a pleasure to see you at work. I have a few more questions." Ellis wiped his brow, setting aside his trowel. "Ask away, my lord. Last night you were reportedly absent at a crucial hour. Might I ask why?" Ellis's eyes flickered with a momentary shadow. "I was in the greenhouse tending to the plants. It's my duty, especially before the frost sets in." "Alone?" "Yes." The hall was quiet. I heard nothing unusual. "Did you see anyone near the greenhouse at that time?" "No one." "Just the usual wildlife?" Wimsey studied him carefully. "You say you found the ring in the greenhouse a week ago?" "That's right, sir. It lay among the ivy. Odd, since I hadn't seen Mr. Vries wearing it before. Do you suspect anyone of foul play?" Ellis shrugged, unease tightening his features. "There are tensions, my lord, but I've no proof, only suspicions." Wimsey's mind circled, back to the note, where shadows gather and silence speaks. The greenhouse, with its twisting vines and concealed panels, was a fitting place for secrets to hide. With a courteous nod, Wimsey left Ellis to his garden and returned to the hall, where Mrs. Pritchard awaited him in the drawing-room. Her demeanor was calm, but firm, a woman accustomed to the steadiness demanded by her role. "Mrs. Pritchard," Wimsey began, "I seek to understand the household dynamics more clearly. Are there any strained relationships or recent disputes I should know about?" She considered carefully. "Well, Lord Peter, tensions have indeed risen. Mr. Hartley had been pressing for changes in how the estate was managed. Some of the staff resisted, fearing upheaval. Such as? Mr. Dawes, the butler, was particularly resistant. He values tradition and order above all. And Captain Pelham, more pragmatic. He supports Mr. Hartley's plans, but some suspect he has ambitions of his own." Wimsey smiled faintly. "Ambition can be a dangerous companion." "Indeed," Mrs. Pritchard agreed. "There's also the matter of Miss de Vries, whose past remains something of an enigma. Have you observed anything unusual about her?" "She is discreet but watchful. I sometimes wonder if she hides more than just a reserved nature." The conversation was interrupted by the sharp ring of the telephone. Mrs. Pritchard answered, quickly, then nodded toward Wimsey. "It's Sergeant Parker, my lord. He has something urgent to report." Wimsey took the receiver. "Yes, Sergeant?" "We found something in the study, a hidden compartment in Mr. Hartley's desk. There's a ledger inside, a record of financial transactions." "Proceed," Wimsey said, intrigued. "It shows large sums withdrawn recently, with payments made to an unknown recipient. The handwriting is unfamiliar." "Could it be a motive?" Wimsey asked, heart quickening. "Possibly. Also there's a letter found, alongside, partially burned. It mentions threats if certain demands were not met." Wimsey's mind raced. "Keep the ledger and letter secured. I will come at once." Minutes later, he was in the study, the air thick with the scent of old paper and fading smoke. The ledger lay open on the desk, the entries meticulous and cold. He examined the names, sums, and dates. A pattern emerged. payments coinciding with recent arguments and tensions within the estate. Wimsey's thoughts returned to the shadow Lily saw, the quarrel over the tools and the tampered clock. Someone had been desperate to conceal financial misconduct and willing to kill for it. As he turned to leave, a faint noise caught his attention, the soft creak of a floorboard near the door. He paused, senses alert. "Come in." The door opened, revealing Captain Pelham, his usual composure replaced by a flicker of unease. "Lord Peter," Pelham said cautiously, "I thought it prudent to check on you." Wimsey regarded him steadily. "And what might you seek here, Captain?" Pelham hesitated. "Only to offer my assistance in resolving this unfortunate matter." Wimsey's eyes narrowed slightly. "Assistance is always welcome, so long as it is sincere." The captain nodded. "Of course." As Pelham departed, Wimsey remained in the study, piecing together the threads of greed, fear, and betrayal. The night's revelations promised that the final truth was close, but whether it would emerge in daylight or darkness remained uncertain. For now, the house at Foxheath held its breath, the shadows deepening, and silence waiting to speak once more. The late afternoon sunlight cast long, slanting shadows through the grand windows of Foxheath Hall, but Lord Peter Wimsey's mind was far from the serene vista. The threads of the case, tangled and obscure, had begun to reveal a pattern. Yet it was one stitched with deception so deftly woven it threatened to unravel all assumptions. The ledger, with its carefully concealed payments, was at the center of this design, and the partial letter hinted at threats and fear. The household, once a tableau of genteel calm, now seemed a stage set for duplicity. Wimsey paced slowly in the study, considering the characters who circled about this mystery like wary animals. Captain Pelham's visit, though ostensibly benign, now bore the faintest scent of something more calculated. Yet suspicion alone was insufficient. The dance required a precise step. He had resolved then to test the alibis, the timetables, the sequences of events. The clock in the hall, the one Mrs. Pritchard mentioned as having been altered, was a keystone. If its hands were shifted, then the very chronology of last night's occurrences might be a fabrication. Calling the housekeeper to join him, Wimsey examined the great clock with her. "Mrs. Pritchard, when did you notice the clock was wrong?" "Just this morning, my lord," she replied, peering up at the face. "It was some minutes fast, I think." Wimsey's gaze traced the hands. At present they indicated nearly 4:15, and the clock was displaying a different time. "Last night, you are certain?" "Yes, I remember because it was the hour Mr. Hartley usually has his tea." A quiet smile curved Wimsey's lips. "Then we may infer the clock was tampered with some time after that." He stepped over to the mantelpiece, observing a collection of decorative objects. The importance of a clock is not merely telling time, but establishing it as the anchors of truth in a sea of lies. Mrs. Pritchard nodded, her expression grave. "Then someone wished to confuse us as to when certain events happened." "Precisely." Wimsey summoned Sergeant Parker. "I need you to check all timepieces in the house, clocks, watches, anything that might anchor a timeline, and verify the servants' accounts of their whereabouts against these." The sergeant departed, brisk and purposeful. Turning his attention to the staff again, Wimsey sought subtle contradictions. The butler, Mr. Dawes, was the next on his list. A man rigid in manner, fiercely loyal to tradition, and perhaps resistant to change not merely for its own sake, but for reasons more personal. Wimsey found Dawes in the scullery, polishing silverware, with a meticulous hand. "Mr. Dawes," Wimsey began, "you have been frank in your opinions about the recent proposals for the estate?" Dawes straightened, eyes steely. "I serve the house and its traditions, my lord. Changes threaten stability." "And yet," Wimsey said, "one might imagine that the estate's well-being is paramount." "Indeed, my lord. But some changes come at too high a cost. I confess, I worried that some of the new plans might endanger the estate's finances, and, by extension, its future." Wimsey studied the man carefully. "Have you discussed these concerns with Captain Pelham?" "Only briefly," Dawes answered. "I do not trust him entirely. There is a sharpness in his ambitions that unsettles me." "Ah, and yet you serve the same master." "Yes, my lord, Wimsey's thoughts returned to the payments in the ledger, the unknown recipient. "Tell me, have you noticed anything unusual regarding communications or visitors in recent days?" Dawes's lips pressed tightly. "There have been strange calls late at night. I know because I handle the house telephony." Late-night calls. Intriguing. After Dawes left, Wimsey returned to the letter, the fragment with its ominous warnings. The ink was faded but legible enough to convey a chilling message. Comply with the demands or face consequences most dire. Who could have sent such a missive, and to whom? The handwriting did not match any known household member, nor did it resemble Mr. Hartley's. Wimsey resolved to consult Miss de Vries once more. Her elusive past and composed demeanour had piqued his suspicions, though never quite set his thoughts alight. He found her in the drawing-room, arranging a vase of lilies with practised grace. "Miss de Vries," he began, "I wish to speak with you about your acquaintance with Mr. Hartley." She looked up, serene yet guarded. "We have known each other for several months, my lord. Professional acquaintance only." "Is that so? Were you aware of any threats he might have received?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, Mr. Hartley confided little in me," Wimsey pressed gently. "And the ring found in the greenhouse, do you recognize it?" Her eyes flickered briefly. "No, I cannot say it belongs to me. Yet Mr. Ellis claims to have found it among the ivy, which you tend." "Yes. I was puzzled by its presence. I intended to ask Mr. Hartley, but he is no longer." "Here?" Wimsey finished softly. Miss de Vries inclined her head. "Indeed." Their interview was interrupted by a knock at the door. Mrs. Pritchard entered, bearing a telegram. "From the local constabulary, my lord. It arrived this morning." Wimsey took the telegram, scanning the terse message. It announced that the coroner had returned a verdict, death by strangulation, but the exact time was uncertain due to the body's position. More troubling, it mentioned a missing cufflink discovered at the crime scene, one that bore the Hartley family crest. Wimsey's eyes narrowed. The missing cufflink. That was the first clue, the broken cufflink in the drawing-room. "It appears it is more than mere accident," Mrs. Pritchard nodded. "A symbol, perhaps." Wimsey stood, the pieces converging. This missing cufflink could have been lost during a struggle or deliberately taken as a token or a warning. Turned to Miss de Vries. "You mentioned nothing of a struggle?" "No, my lord. Yet the cufflink is broken. It was shattered when found." "Curious. Miss de Vries, might you accompany me to the scene of the crime? There is one final observation I wish to make." The pair proceeded to the drawing-room, the room still bearing the faint scent of tobacco and faint echoes of last night's disturbances. Wimsey examined the window, slightly ajar, and the heavy drapes, now drawn aside. "Did you notice anything unusual about the window?" Wimsey asked. She studied it, frowning. "No, it appears undisturbed. Yet it is open." He touched the latch, noting a faint scratch. "This window was opened from outside recently. Someone entered or exited thus, or sought to give that impression." Wimsey's eyes caught the light on the parquet floor. There, barely visible, a small near-invisible scuff. "Aha," he said softly. "The footprints." Miss de Vries looked uneasy. "What do you deduce, my lord? That the killer may have staged this window to mislead us?" Wimsey's thoughts returned to the note. In the greenhouse, the tampered clock, the missing cufflink, and the shadow Lily described. The case was no longer a simple matter of theft or jealousy, but a carefully constructed act of deception. The house was no longer merely a backdrop, but an accomplice in the crime, with its secret panels, soundproofed rooms, and concealed passages. The sun dipped behind the trees, casting the room into a somber twilight. Wimsey felt the weight of the next steps pressing upon him. The final reveal was close, but the stage was not yet set. He must prepare a dramatic confrontation, one that would expose the tangled web of lies and bring to light the truth hidden beneath the polite facades. For now, the shadows lengthened and silence deepened. But the truth would soon speak, clear and unyielding as the morning light. The gathering dusk deepened the shadows in Foxheath Hall, but Lord Peter Wimsey's resolve burned brighter than ever. The threads he had carefully traced now formed a near-complete tapestry, yet the final, crucial strand remained elusive. He knew the time had come to bring all parties together, to weave the narrative in a way that none could deny. After conferring with Sergeant Parker and reviewing every alibi once more, Wimsey felt a distinct rhythm emerging, one that pulsed with tension and unspoken truths. It was time to confront the household. He summoned everyone to the grand drawing room. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn shut, muting the late evening outside, and the flicker of a low fire lent the chamber a somber, intimate air. Captain Pelham stood rigid near the mantelpiece. The housekeeper, Mrs. Pritchard, flanked the doorway, and Miss de Vries settled quietly on a settee, her expression inscrutable but alert. Mr. Dawes, the butler, was already present, his posture stiff with unease. Wimsey's gaze swept over the assembled group before he began. "We have pieced together much since the discovery of Mr. Hartley's untimely death. But there remain questions that demand answers, and truths yet to be confessed." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "First, the clock," he continued, "which was found tampered with, its hands set ahead to obscure the actual time of death. This deliberate falsification was intended to confuse and mislead us, yet the evidence indicates that the clock was altered after Mr. Hartley's last tea, thus narrowing the time frame of the crime." A slight murmur passed through the room. The broken cufflink bearing the Hartley family crest, discovered near the scene, was shattered in the struggle. But more significantly, one cufflink remains unaccounted for. This suggests the assailant may have taken it, either as a trophy or to frame another. Wimsey fixed his gaze on Captain Pelham. "Captain, you expressed concern for the estate's future and the finances. The ledger revealed payments that cannot be explained simply by maintenance or improvements." Pelham's face darkened. "Yes, I admit, there have been expenditures that raise questions, but I deny any hand in wrongdoing. My intentions were to protect the estate." "Yet your ambitions may have clouded your judgment," Wimsey said calmly. "You were aware of the letter containing threats. Did you ever receive such a note yourself?" Pelham shook his head slowly. "No. I knew only that Mr. Hartley had enemies." Wimsey's eyes then turned to Miss de Vries. "You tend the gardens with great care and have access to all parts of the estate, including the greenhouse. Yet a ring, not your own, was found concealed there. Care to explain?" Miss de Vries's composure faltered for a moment before she replied, "I found the ring and intended to return it to Mr. Hartley. I never wore it." "Did you ever suspect someone else might have planted it?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I had the suspicion." The atmosphere thickened with unspoken accusations. "Mr. Dawes," Wimsey addressed the butler, "you mentioned late-night telephone calls that disturbed you. Can you identify the caller or the nature of these calls?" Dawes's jaw tightened. "They were always brief and the voice disguised. I suspected blackmail, though to whom I could not say." Wimsey smiled thinly. "Blackmail indeed. The threats Mr. Hartley received may have been far more dangerous than anyone anticipated." He then directed attention to Mrs. Pritchard. "You have served this house faithfully for years. Did you notice anything unusual last night?" Her eyes lowered. "A shadow, my lord, glimpsed through the servants' quarters, someone moving stealthily." "Could it have been the murderer?" She nodded slowly. "I fear so." Wimsey paced before the fire, the flames reflecting in his keen eyes. The window by the drawing room was open from outside, a staged entrance or exit. Someone wished to mislead us into believing the killer fled that way. He turned to the group. "But the footprints found in the soft earth outside tell a different story, one of a hurried departure indeed, but from the opposite side of the house." A sudden realization dawned on all. "Who then," Wimsey asked, "had the motive and the opportunity to commit this crime?" He paused, allowing the question to hang heavily. "Captain Pelham, you sought to secure the estate's finances. Miss de Vries, your presence near the greenhouse was more than botanical interest. Mr. Dawes, your loyalty might have driven you to act in the estate's name. And Mrs. Pritchard, your shadowy glimpse hints at secrets concealed in darkness." Titoin. Room was silent but for the crackle of the fire. Wimsey took a breath and pressed on. "Yet one crucial piece remains, the torn letters author. It spoke of compliance and dire consequences, a message of coercion." He glanced toward Miss de Vries again. Your knowledge of Mr. Hartley's affairs was greater than you admitted. Did you write this letter? No, she whispered, but I feared its sender. Then we must consider another. He turned sharply to Pelham. You have denied receiving threats, yet the payments in the ledger suggest bribery, silence, or complicity. Are you certain you are innocent? Pelham's face flushed with anger. I did what I must to save the estate, but I did not kill Henry Hartley. Wimsey's voice hardened. Words are easy, actions harder to conceal. He stepped toward Dawes. You who oversee the household and its secrets, might you have intervened to protect your master's interests? Dawes's silence spoke volumes. Wimsey held up the missing cufflink. This cufflink was not simply lost. It was taken as a message. Someone wished to implicate the family. He paced again, then halted. The true killer is among you, hiding behind facades of loyalty and duty. But their mask slips. His eyes locked onto Mrs. Pritchard. You saw a shadow. You heard whispered threats, yet you did not come forward immediately. Why? Her voice trembled. Fear, my lord. Fear of what might come if the truth were spoken. And yet silence has allowed murder to thrive. The tension peaked, every face marked by uncertainty. Wimsey raised a hand to still the gathering storm. For this house holds many secrets, but none that truth cannot unmask. Tomorrow I shall speak with the local magistrate and have the estate secured. Tonight, I implore you all to reflect upon your actions. The dawn will bring clarity. As the assembled company dispersed in uneasy contemplation, Wimsey lingered beside the window, gazing into the moonlit gardens. The house breathed around him, its walls whispering of hidden corridors and unspoken deeds. He knew the coming hours would be decisive. The labyrinth of deception was nearly navigated, but the final step, revealing the murderer, remained. His mind turned over each fact, each subtle gesture, each barely perceptible clue. The night was silent, but the truth was stirring, ready to break free from its shadowed cage. And when it did, nothing would remain concealed. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting a pale glow through the tall windows of Foxheath Hall. Lord Peter Wimsey stood quietly in the drawing-room, the assembled household awaiting the moment he would finally unravel the tangled web of deceit that had ensnared them all. His voice was calm but resolute as he addressed the group. Last night, we revisited the clues with care. This morning, we must confront the truth, one that has long been hidden behind a veil of fear and pretense. He began by recounting the sequence of events with precise clarity: the tampered clock, the missing cufflink, the mysterious letter, and the shadow glimpsed by Mrs. Pritchard. Each piece fit together like parts of a delicate mechanism, revealing a motive forged not in hatred alone but in desperation. Wimsey's eyes settled on Captain Pelham. You feared the ruin of the estate and sought to control its future. You orchestrated payments to silence those who opposed your plans. But your ambition blinded you to the cost. When Mr. Hartley discovered your dealings, he confronted you. Pelham's expression hardened. I did not kill him. Perhaps not directly, Wimsey allowed, but your actions set the fatal chain in motion. He then turned to Mr. Vries. You loved this place, but your loyalty was divided. The ring found in the greenhouse belonged to your late father, an heirloom you wished to protect from Mr. Hartley's creditors. You planted it to mislead suspicion, not foreseeing how it would entangle you deeper. Her gaze dropped. The weight. Faire regret clear, Wimsey continued, addressing Dawes and Mrs. Pritchard. Your silence shielded secrets, but fear is a fragile guard. It was you, Mr. Dawes, who intercepted the threats and sought to protect your master's honor, yet you failed to prevent the tragedy. Mrs. Pritchard, your glimpse of the shadow was no mere accident. You witnessed the moment the fatal blow was struck. All eyes shifted as the tension thickened. Wimsey's voice grew firm. The murderer was none other than the housekeeper's son, a man desperate and unseen until now. He believed Mr. Hartley threatened his family's livelihood and took a dreadful step in panic. A gasp filled the room. Mrs. Pritchard's face crumpled in shock and sorrow. My son. The detective nodded solemnly. His motive, though, wrought from desperation, does not excuse the act. Justice must be served. Wimsey's gaze softened as he addressed the household once more. This tragedy is a painful reminder that even the closest ties can harbor secrets deadly enough to shatter lives. But through patience and perseverance, truth prevails. As the local magistrate arrived to take the necessary actions, Wimsey felt the burden lift slightly. The estate would heal, and the darkness that had shadowed Foxheath Hall would give way to light. With a final glance around the room, he allowed himself a small, knowing smile. The game was over, the mystery solved, not by grand gestures, but by the quiet, relentless pursuit of truth that defined his very nature. Foxheath Hall, with all its secrets, was at last laid bare,